And I am not in any way wanting to trivialize the beauty industry. I think all too often that's what happens in conventional medicine, but they are not all snake oil salesmen. And I visited a number of the cosmetic laboratories in Brittany, and they're very, very impressive. And they really go after new marine products in the same way we saw with land biotech. Of course, they're using it for beauty, but what I like is they're actually going after it in a more positive way than we see here in land. So instead of sort of demonizing them, we got to really learn something. And this is not a popular view, but I think it's a very valid one. Anyway, so what can we do about all of this? Right. In Wales, what I would run into was people, if I said, why don't you eat lava bread? And they would say, well, there was the Sellafield disaster and a lot of it got polluted. Well, that was many, many years ago. And I say, why won't you eat oysters or cockles or anything? Well, they might be polluted. So what they do is they don't eat seaweed or oysters. They don't actually address the problem of sea pollution, sewage, and things like that. So looking at food in this way is a great, it's a good barometer. Anyway, what do I think we ought to do? Well, looking at this, what I see is the fact that all around the world, you've got, two different bands of seaweed growing areas. This has not been mapped. There's no body of information on the use of seaweed, medical, nutritional, even though, as you see from the table next door, how much of that stuff was seaweed? And, last night, at least 3 of the dishes had seaweed in. If you look at the packaging next door, there was one seaweed packaging that said, this is very good for longevity and beauty. Right, what is this actually? There's nothing, and I think that what we ought to do for any of us who are interested in the food medicine crossover and where it might develop next, we ought to sort of give marine preparations a real history that it hasn't had yet, by helping to fill in the blanks, helping to map things, different areas. We should do it worldwide, because one thing that's interesting is the archaeological recent archaeological work shows, as Michael had said, that in fact the coast was the place where you had a lot of the early important development of humankind. That was along the coast that you had a lot of migration. They're finding early traces of seaweed, which was used obviously as a food, possibly as a medicine. We ought to start building this up so that we can take it somewhere, because while it's sort of still floating in limbo, on the one hand is exotic products from the East, and on the other is something blanked in the Western medical tradition. We can't hope to go far, but I think we should. That's it. Wow. Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
By the way, I think maybe I galloped through that. If anybody wants the paper with the footnotes and the proper sentences, I'd be happy to send it to Vivian, and then she can send it out. Right.
Well, it's a good time for discussion. One there, and then would you say that the interest in the oceans, which you indicated, occurred when we had the navigational compass? Keep the questions. Kaori, did you hear the instruction to keep that by you?
Oh, yes. But, I'm sorry. I thought I was supposed to. Sorry, yes. Do I think so? I never thought about it that way. Honestly.
It's about 1300.
Where I come from, we never had the compass. Actually, we used something else. But yes, I said.
The compass had its great effect that you can't use the stars if it's cloudy.
Right.
Whereas the compass allows you. In the Mediterranean, you were rarely out of sight of land. So it's not significant. Wasn't Caesar confused by the tides in the English Channel? So, I think when civilization was a Mediterranean phenomenon, the sea would have the sea outside the Mediterranean would have been very frightening, and therefore people didn't. Secondly, you talked about the beauty industry and seaweed. The beauty industry is 98% fraudulent, simply because if something is proved to be active, to do something to you, it ceases to be of interest to the pharmaceutical, to the cosmetic industry, because it then has to undergo extensive toxicological testing. And so they would be very worried if you proved that something in seaweed actually did anything to the skin. Now, I've been at a health farm where we were offered, I think, a seaweed bath.
A seaweed wrap, maybe,
Seaweed
yes.
bath, yes. And I've never seen such unadulterated piffle in the whole of my life as this. I was offered with a Scottish douche as well. So I would, please don't quote the beauty industry as proving anything.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's like Michael said, you know, well, I mean, you're talking about how much many of those capsules contain sawdust. Yes, I'm sure that's true. But I think it does. I think there is something in it. I think you're quite right. There's a lot of, you know, fraud around, but I mean, but can't you see I'm only 1,000 years old? It's worked. No, honestly, I mean, if you have seaweed on your skin, it does have a sort of an effect, you know, might be. You don't think so? It can't all be, you know what? We need the Wellcome to fund a really good objective tour of all the top spas to audition these.
Give me £10 and I'll give you the answer.
No, I mean, I
I mean, not me, because I don't know that I read it that carefully, but the three of us here have something to say about seaweed and beauty.
Which is
and
to
beauty,
do
I
with
think,
its
as well.
iodine content
Yeah.
and its use in China. You've looked at the data for people where there's endemic cretinism.
So first century first mentions. And this goes for, I mean, you know, a thinner neck is usually considered.
It's iodine in the thyroid gland.
yeah, but
We have a cosmetic aspect of this as well.
There was
Well, no, only in the sense that.
Oh, I see, yes.
But- yes,
But yes.
But Vivian-
Cosmetic uses that could be.
But I
But you can't say
don't
that they
accept
can't
the
say it's
term.
bunkum without.
I don't
doing
accept the
research.
term cosmetic uses. I don't think that has any meaning.
oh, well, well, among the general public, in many ways, you know, they don't think of it as cosmetic. They think of it as self-medication. I mean, that is. But anyway, if you were just saying that there have been studies about sort of toxic content, the thing is, I always say, well, if it is so toxic, then why isn't the entire population of Japan dead?
You're not saying that it's toxic. It was used for.
Oh yeah, for goiter.
During the goiter.
Yeah, no, this is,
First century.
yeah.
The first century, and then right the way through.
Well, that's very good. Now, if you think, though, Vivian, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was like an entire mapping of the uses of seaweed in the same way that there are of terrestrial plants? And then you could sort of get at some of these thornier problems, like what did they do in Kazakhstan? Even though in, you know, the interior of South America now they're finding these balls of fossilized seaweed that were used as trade goods far, far beyond the mountains. So, you know.
very